Hi everyone and welcome back. I know it's been a while since I've posted a video, but I will be posting more soon just because I have a bunch of works that I would like to share with you guys and show some tips along the way. So this painting is done on Rives BFK paper, which is a traditional printmaking paper, and I'm using it for my pastel because I love the softness that it lends to the figures. It's not got a sanded surface, and I know we're starting in the middle of the application of pastel, but I still think you can learn a lot and, follow along on the way. So the mother has really beautiful, rich, deep skin tones, and a lot of people tend to just go for the burnt siennas and the ochres, but she's got a lot more going on in her face, in her body, in her skin tone than just browns. For example, I'm using turquoise for the highlights, and for the leg I'm using a lot of blues and greens. I use a lot of greens and blues in the shadows, but I use those colors because those are the undertones that I see. So a good thing to remember when painting skin tones, no matter what shade she is or he is or what your subject matter is, doesn't matter if it's light or dark, don't just stick to the traditional flesh tones that you see. I'm working on the knee over here, and her leg is folded, and the highlight on the left side of her leg, of her knee, it's too bright. It's too much, so I'm going to go in and soften it later. But right now, I'm just focusing on lights and darks. What do I see? What color? What undertone do I see? And how can I make that part of her body? And this paper will take a lot of pastel, but it doesn't hold it. I mean, it holds it great, but it doesn't hold it the way a UArt would, in that there's no sanded surface, so I'm careful not to fill the tooth of the paper too much. So I have to be very conscientious when I try to add layers. I can't just keep adding layers because I'll fill up the tooth of the paper too much if I add without thinking about it. So that's another thing you want to do. When you are choosing a paper for your pastel painting, make sure that you are aware of its behavior, how it will limit your painting, how it will shape how you apply color. As you can see, I'm using blue over here, and I'm doing that because I don't think like a dark brown does justice to the shadows. I'm going to layer some reds and some browns over it, but the blue really shines through, just like as in normal skin. It's not just one color under any light. There's a lot of colors that bounce off our skin tones. So I'm just going in and making the corners less harsh. And that's a wonderful thing about this paper. It makes everything look very soft, kind of like a candlelight effect almost. So it's very flattering for people, for portraits. You don't really just get those hard edges. So like I said, I'm going in with a dark brown and with a couple of sienna-like colors as well, and some ochres. Bringing in some highlights. And remember that no part of the body, no part of anything actually, is just dark and just light. There's variations in the light and there's variations in the dark, and that's what I'm doing. I'm adding a little bit of interest to an expanse of dark and an expanse of light. Like I said, I'm going in and I'm reshaping the leg to make it look believable, like it's not just flesh, that it's got shadow and it's got life. Just adding a small highlight over there, bringing it down the leg. And hands are very, very tricky if you're a beginner. I know in art school I would always have paintings without hands. Suddenly my subject matter would have hands outside of the canvas. So this is something that you might want to practice before you do it on your final painting. Now I'm used to it, so I can work on it, but it's always a good tip to practice the hands before you do it on your final painting. And I wanted to bring in the colors of the skin tone into the cloth that she has around her. And I find that that is a very nice cohesive thing to do, and I tend to do that in all my paintings. To reuse the color, what happens is that you get the sense of repetition, and what repetition does makes it look like a cohesive whole. So reusing colors everywhere kind of tends to bring everything together for me. And we're going to go into the skin tones of the baby, and he is significantly lighter than his mother, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't have greens and other colors in there as well. And one thing that I always do when I'm painting young children and babies is to keep the edges soft and to keep the transitions soft. You can see a bunch of Giraud pastels over there. And if you look at the mother, I have strong variations in color over there. I have strong light, strong dark. And I do the same with the baby in a way, but I make the edges of it all much softer. And that kind of lends a childlike, gentler effect, and that's what I want for the baby. And I'm layering many colors over each other. I'm going with a much lighter green for the shadows, and then I'm layering some ochres over that. And you can layer colors on top of each other to get your desired effect. I know they always say in pastels you want to go from dark to light, but depending on what my subject is and what I want to achieve, I don't always stick with that, but it's a good rule of thumb. Start dark and then go to light. It's much easier. The light kind of tends to corrupt your darks, and it's very hard to achieve the deepest darks that you want if you want to go really deep and you started off with a lighter color. And in the shadows, I'm using greens to kind of bring in a shadow effect. And there we have it, like a bright highlight. But I'm bringing it into the colors underneath so that they kind of mix. And that's the great thing about starting off with a darker color. When you add a light over it, it can mix and mute the brightness. And that's where I'm bringing in more greens, a little darker green this time, but I wanted to create a deeper shadow. I could have easily gone for a brown, but I think that would just not do justice to the skin tone. So really try to add greens and blues into your skin tones. That's what is going to make them come alive. And I'm putting in my darkest darks right now, and I'm going to go over those and soften them up later. You want to pay attention to how the light is hitting your subject matter. It's easy for me to fill in what I think I see if I don't pay attention to my subject matter. By this I mean I can just keep working on my canvas without really studying the object that I'm painting, and I'll get something that might look similar, but it won't be exact in the sense it won't be the representation that I want. I won't be able to play with it the way I want to if I don't look at how light is behaving on my subject matter. So always take a minute or two, step back, look at your subject, see how the light is touching your subject, and then see how you want to represent it on your canvas. Always keep checking your reference. So as you can tell, I'm breaking up the highlight just a little bit because I want there to be variation in the flesh. I want to show the roles the baby has, and what better way than to play with the light on his stomach and his hands. So I'm going in, adding more highlights, making them a little bit softer, deepening them a little bit so that they don't just stand out too much. And that's something that I see a lot of people do when they first start painting, is that their highlights are too bright. They're just in your face, and I mean, it's normal. You want to see the brightness, and so you want to represent it on your canvas, but see it in context. See how the brightness relates to everything around it. Is it too bright? Do you need to go a little bit darker? You don't always have to use white. Maybe a soft yellow, maybe a soft blue. That's what you need instead of like a bright white. So we might need to tone down our brights. That's something to really keep in mind. And again, I'm softening up everything eventually. I make a dark stroke, but then I go in and I soften that dark stroke because I want that baby to have a sense of roundness and a sense of pudgy little arms. And I get asked by a lot of people, how do you get those precise details on the face? And there are many ways to approach them. I'm using a small, thin Giraud pastel, which is like a nice, small, thin pastel that's really good for details. I also use it for larger parts, but I find that Girouds are really, really great for the face to get those little details in there. They get you into the nooks and crannies. And if you need a harder pastel, you can do that too. I find that I can layer hard and soft pastels on top of each other, to varying degrees, of course. For the face, I like to use either pastel pencils, or I have some harder pastels that are long and thin and I can really get in some details, or I have pastels that are soft pastels that are small enough that I can get into the nooks and crannies of the face. And one thing that I see a lot of people do with pastels, I mean, it's very tempting because you get these beautiful sets and you don't want to break the pastels, but break the pastels. You will get so much more out of your pastels when you break them. So, terrifying as it is, break the pastel. For the highlights on his face, I'm not just using plain white. I'm using a little tint of blue in there. The skin tones are really, really warm. They've got a lot of warm yellows and reds and a little bit of oranges in there. And I like to play with the highlights. I like a soft, cool highlight to kind of offset the warmth of the skin tone. And I find that that really plays really well visually. And don't forget the catch light in the eyes. And for that, I really do use a hard pastel. I find that those are the ones that really get a fine point in there. So I do think hard pastels are an essential to have when you're actually painting in pastels. You will be using them throughout. Softening the edges of the eyes is essential to making your portrait lifelike. A lot of people, when they start doing portraits or when they start painting people's faces, they tend to go in and represent the eye very detailed. And by that I mean, the edges of the eyes are extremely defined. that's not always the case. You don't have to define the edges of the eye. You just have to see how light touches the edges and how it blends in with the rest of the surrounding skin. That's how you're going to take your paintings to another level, and I will do a video on that so that people can understand what I mean when I say this. But when you look at the eye of this baby, or even the mother, I haven't defined every edge. I haven't defined everything. Sometimes colors bleed into each other. The position of the ears is another marker for the face. Be very careful where you position the ear in your painting, because that's an actual anchor point they can use to measure parts of the face with. You can see where the ear is in relation to the eyes, in relation to the mouth or the nose, and you can really get a very good likeness if you just pay attention to strong anchor points like the ear. I like to have a very dark background against the soft highlight of the baby's shoulder, so I chose to make the background against which she is sitting, so her top a little bit darker than it was on my reference image. And that's something that you can do as an artist. You don't have to exactly follow everything that is there on your reference image. You can take artistic license. You don't have to represent it exactly the way that it is. Otherwise, you just need a photo. I didn't do this painting in one sitting. It's a really big painting, so forgive me. And just a little organizational tip that I have found over the years to be really helpful. I always keep a little bucket near me of all the colors I'm using for the skin tones. This way I'm not looking for a color that I used or for a stick that I use and I can't find it and I cannot reproduce the same skin tone in a different sitting. So the hands are front and center of my painting. They are in the foreground of the painting, but I don't want that to be the focus, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. I'm going to suggest detail, but I'm not going to elaborate on it too much. And if you find hands intimidating, I used to in art school. I found them very hard, but they get easier as you paint your way through life. Just practice. Take a sketchbook and just keep practicing all your hand gestures, and eventually you'll get the hang of it. And this part of my reference image is almost black, but I generally don't want to use black here. I want to make it a little bit more lively. I want it to have some interest and some detail, so I'm giving it a little bit extra dimension. And there's a lot of beading going on in the reference image, and this is just my style, but I like to suggest. I don't like to spell it out, so I give a lot of clues that there are beads over there, but I don't go in and shade every single bead. I like it to look a little bit more painterly, than super realistic. But that's just my style. As you can see, I'm going over the green with a really lovely ochre, and again, a reminder, don't be scared of greens and blues when it comes to skin tones. They are essential to creating lifelike skin tones. And while I keep painting, I'm just going to give you a little bit of background about this particular reference image that I chose and why I chose it. It is of a Khoisan mother and child. I hope I'm saying it right. They are descendants of early modern humans that appeared in Africa around 150,000 years ago, and I believe they are direct descendants of them. They can trace their genetic history back to them. So I wanted to paint them because I find, one, they're really beautiful. I mean, look at that mom, she's just gorgeous, and that baby is adorable. So I wanted to celebrate their beauty, but also just how incredible their DNA is, how incredible their story is. And if you have any information about them, please feel free to share, but I just wanted to do a little tribute to a people that have incredible, incredible history. And this is the ending part. I mean, it's always hard to finish a painting that is this big just because you get tired of it, and it's okay to let it be for a little while, come back after some time, finish it in more than one sitting. I know I used to get grief a lot about, hey, why don't you just finish it in one go? Well, it's hard. It's a big painting. You get mentally exhausted. So it's okay. You know, you can step back, you can take a look later. You can come back and see what works and what doesn't, and you come back with a fresh perspective. Just adding in details into the hand and into the clothing of the little boy. And remember, I'm just using a lot of colors that aren't exactly what you would think of when you think skin tones. When would you think purple or blue is the right color to use if you don't use them? So again, branch out, use a bunch of different colors that you wouldn't normally go for, by which I mean colors other than brown and yellow ochre. Just let them be. Use them. I'm not saying don't, but make sure you use your blues and greens and oranges and reds in there as well, just to get rich, deep skin tones. And just another thing about skin tones in general, people are often intimidated by dark skin. How do I paint this? I have never painted dark skin before. It's just like lighter skin tones. You just have to know which colors to use. You use the same methodology. You still try to see what are the undertones. What do I do with the shadows? How do I bring the shadows to life? It's just a different set of colors that you use. So the knowledge of painting lighter skin tones and darker skin tones, it's really not that different. So don't get too intimidated by it. And if you look, I'm using the same techniques on the baby as I did on the mother. I used the same idea that, hey, you know, I need more than just yellows and ochres. I used lighter greens because I don't want it to have an as intense shadow, but I used greens nonetheless, and I used some blues, lighter blues, but they were blues. So it carries through. Finishing up the piece of cloth on her, I guess it's her right. And I'm going for really strong gestural strokes with the cloth. I don't want to be too too detailed because I don't want it to take away too much from her. So I'm just trying to use my strokes as the direction of the cloth. So we're just going to go and finish up the remainder of the painting. I'm adding a little bit more detail into the cloth, giving it a little bit more highlight. Like I said, I didn't do this in one sitting. It was a big painting. And we are done. I'm just going to sign it. Pull the masking tape gently because you don't want to rip the paper. If you like this video, be sure to like and subscribe, and head over to artluxury.com for more of my paintings.